The Liberals are again cutting the number of study permits Canada gives out to international students. Today, Immigration Minister Marc Miller announced the cap will go down by 10% next year, and it will stay at that number for 2026. There are also new restrictions coming for work permits after students graduate. That includes tying 3-year permits to higher levels of study and requirements for French or English language proficiency. Plus, there are new limits on work permits for spouses of both workers and students. So how will this affect the total picture of temporary residents in Canada? Immigration Minister Marc Miller joins me now. Minister, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thank you, David. Good evening.
Just to start on the announcement, we heard from the post-secondary sector when you announced the move to reduce the number of student visas, the turmoil it would plunge them into. Now you're giving them another cut. You're giving them a horizon, but you're giving them another cut. How do you expect them to respond to that?
Probably the same way they responded before, David, but I think there's room for improvement in the way they go out and recruit people, recruit international students. It's not cheap to live in Canada. We have one of the best education systems in the world. I think we need an international visa system that reflects that. It hasn't necessarily up to now. So in trimming down that volume, we're also putting a lot of qualitative measures in place. You summarized some of the latest ones just now. But just to make sure we can actually be proud as a country of this international student visa program, which does aim to get some of the best and brightest into Canada. That hasn't been the case. And the institutions that vary in quality from some of the best in Canada, the McGills, the U of T's, the UBCs, to some of the absolute worst. Hopefully those worst will go out of business, but some of the best need to adjust as well. So no one's innocent in this. I think there's room for improvement, and I'm really hoping and looking forward to working with them to properly address some of these people that are in Canada, precarious positions, and the volume of people that are international students or the postgraduate work permit programs really occupies half of that space of temporary residence in Canada. So if you trust the economists, they've said that the affordability measures that we announced with respect to students and with respect to reducing from 7 to 5% the temporary residence percentage in Canada, it needs to go through that 50% of the pie chart that comprise international students in the postgraduate work permit. With these measures, we believe we will attain those policy goals that the Bank of Canada said they need to see. They need to scrutinize these things, but we think that we're there in terms of the announcements with respect to international students.
Right, and we saw some reporting over the summer saying that the decreased volumes avoided some of the rent jumps that you saw in student housing in a lot of Canada's major cities where a lot of these post-secondary institutions are. But you gave a pretty striking number today on the new visas, in particular for people from India. You said last month they were just 1/5 of what they were in January. I know you say there's bad actors in the post-secondary space that you don't care if they go out of business, but there are some legitimate ones that are being hurt by this, right? I mean, are you worried that this rapid decrease is going to hurt them financially in a pretty significant way?
Well, if we do things right, David, I think there's an opportunity to get it right. The underfunding of post-secondary institutions is one that has been consistent throughout Canada. Provinces who have that responsibility to fund those institutions adequately, and it's shameful that they haven't throughout the years, really need to step up and have a discussion with those institutions as to how they are properly funded. The federal government has a role in this, but people's balance sheets can't be determined by whether they get international students or not. It's a luxury, it's a privilege, and not necessarily a right. And we want to make it and continue to make it the best in the world, and that's what we're moving towards. We need the help from the provinces and those institutions, but I think we're getting there. We see the volumes are down in terms of recruitment, but the system will adjust. And I think with these further adjustments, we'll have something that makes a little more sense than what it has looked like in the past.
So with the numbers going down, this is this calibration and tweaking that you're having to do to deal with this. And I know you're hoping some of the bad actors just disappear as part of this, because I guess they relied on a volume business to work. With the decreased applications and recruitment efforts, will you even hit those targets now, or do you think credible institutions, your more regulated universities and colleges, will pick up the slack that has been created by these moves?
It's a really good question, because I'm not entirely confident that institutions have really adopted their recruiting practices. I've clearly said that the cost of acquisition of these bright students is going to have to increase. I'm not sure that it's really done it over this last period, and so the impact on acceptance is what we've seen in the press. I have no reason to doubt it, but institutions will adjust, and I think that's why we have to make sure that we have a cap that makes sense, as well as sort of the belt and suspenders that come with these privileges, whether people bring their spouses, whether they are entitled to have postgraduate work permits that are tied to the market. These are all things that make sense, and I think will in some sense, have some chilling effect on the sector, but also create opportunities for colleges in particular to adjust their programs, not sort of have fly-by-night business degrees, but really target the market that is constricting, the labor market that is constricting, and adapting these bright young minds to making sure they're trained for the jobs that exist in Canada and the postgraduate work permits that come with them.
Okay, so you say these measures today, they should be enough to meet or exceed your targets for temporary residents in Canada. There's about 5% of the population that this will get us in that direction, though it remains to be seen if it actually gets there. The other challenge you were talking about today is what to do with all of the asylum seekers who are concentrated very heavily in two provinces, Ontario and Quebec. And I know there has been this federal-provincial process happening behind the scenes about finding provinces willing to take some of them and share the burden to ease the strain on Quebec and Ontario. A bunch of provinces have accused you of trying to impose asylum seekers on them without compensation, and you took aim at them today. Are Blaine Higgs and Tim Houston in particular in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia using this issue to help elections?
I think what they're advancing, David, is a complete crock of crap. They, coming out of the Council of Premiers of the Federation, clearly said that we needed a coordinated role and function to make sure that asylum seekers that, as you said, Quebec and Ontario are taking an undue burden of based on their population, needed to be properly distributed, and each province had to do their fair share. Now, we struck a working group with my colleague ministers in provinces throughout the summer to work on these things, and we came up with a bunch of models, some working documents, all collaborative based on federal money on the table, the different roles that the provinces would play were they to accept, but it's always based on a consensual model, the consent of asylum seekers first and foremost, but also the consent of the provinces, importantly, that have to actually play their role. And they made this garbage up. And I sincerely suspect that they've been listening to the presidential elections down south and come up with their own version of that in Canada. And it's for entirely electoralist reasons. I never said that the federal government would force thousands of asylum seekers onto the province of Nova Scotia, province of New Brunswick, or Alberta. And at the same time, they are also coming to me to get more permanent residents in terms of their programs that they have some authority over, but they don't want any asylum seekers. They weren't saying the same thing when it came to Ukrainians, so what gives? I think they totally made it up. It's ridiculous that I have to comment on it, but I guess I do because dealing with fiction sometimes is part of my job. That's entirely what it is. So I think Canadians will see what it is. I think some of their comments are heartless. If a province lifts up their hand and says, we'll take some asylum seekers, we'll work with them, we'll give them money, and make sure these people are treated with dignity as they receive due process.
What do you think gives? You said what gives. You mentioned Ukrainians. No one was upset about the Ukrainians. And I know back in St. John's, where I'm from, there's Ukrainians filling a lot of jobs and stuff since they went there. But Ukrainians are European? Are you suggesting that it's where the asylum seekers are from and maybe what they look like that could be the problem here? Or what do you think?
I just think that in these election cycles where people are up for their own review of their leadership or gearing up to have an election, people think that they can have a little political capital on the back of asylum seekers, which, regardless of their race, color, or creed, are vulnerable people. And I think these conservative premiers, in particular, are weaponizing the issue and making up these things. I told the media today I should really give you the documents that we distributed to my colleagues, my responsible provincial counterparts, because everyone was working together and they've totally sabotaged this group that they asked us to strike in the first place. So, I see it for what it is. I think the rest of the Canadians should see through it pretty quickly. But again, it is what it is, and it's unfortunate that we're here at this place. We have a federal responsibility as well to reduce the number of asylum seekers that are coming into the country, some of them not making legitimate claims. The number you mentioned earlier on is our response to tramping down some of the claims for visas that people are using to come in and then claim asylum. People who come in here for tourist visas should be visiting our beautiful country and not claiming asylum. So that's work that we're doing. There is federal responsibility there. I don't want to shirk that. But clearly, it's a team sport, and every premier, as they said at the Council of Premiers, and they're turning that council into a joke if they don't respect their own words, we all need to do our part.
Well, if you do want to share those documents, we'll be happy to receive them here and look at them. But you did say today it was $1 billion, I think you put on the table. So Blaine Higgs, who my colleague Jacques Poitras is reporting is going to go visit the Lieutenant Governor in New Brunswick tomorrow to call an election. Are you saying he was lying when he said there was no money on the table? It's just a flat-out untruth.
Well, he wasn't. I don't know what's going through his mind in terms of intent, but whatever the result was totally made up. He certainly wasn't listening to the officials from his team that were at the table. The officials that were at the table in my working group kind of intimated that they didn't want asylum seekers with or without money. So, you know, draw your own conclusion. People can look into what's in his mind, but I don't think he has the best interests of asylum seekers at heart. I think he has his own re-election.
Okay.
And that's what he's weaponizing it for.
One last topic I wanted to touch on you. Your riding is right next door to La Salle-Verdun. Not a good night for the Liberal Party, not a good result for the Liberal Party. I know you're a close personal friend of the Prime Minister in addition to being a cabinet minister. But what does it say to you and your party that in a Montreal riding with a Montreal Prime Minister, you can't hold the seat and things are so rough that the Prime Minister's picture isn't even used on Liberal election campaign posters? I mean, what does this tell you about the state of things for your party right now?
Yeah, look, I don't know what that last part, David. He's never been on any of my campaign posters, and that hasn't even made a difference. People have the choice of the posters they use. Some people put themselves up with the Prime Minister or not. That's sort of, I think that's what it is. Look, it sucks to lose. I was personally disappointed. My team was working on it. We had hopes. It was so close. We were pulling votes. The feeling actually at the door was actually quite good. Now, it's no secret to anyone that we're not at the levels we were when the riding was last secured, but we can never take voters for granted. We need to be able to go out there, adjust if need be. Congratulations to Mr. Sauvé from the Bloc Québécois who won. He has only a few short months to prove himself to his constituents. He needs to continue to earn their trust. But we're going to beat him next election. Make no mistake, we'll be there. I'm frustrated as hell that the result was that it was, but it is, and I think we need to respect that.
You couldn't win the confidence of voters in La Salle-Verdun. How confident are you of your ability to hold on to the confidence of the House of Commons? I know we have the first vote next week. The Bloc says you're off the hook, essentially, by their intention to not side with Mr. Poilievre. We'll find out from the NDP in a video tomorrow. But this is going to be the first of many of these things. How long do you think this lasts? How confident are you?
Yeah, and I'd highlight, but I don't want to minimize by-elections, but they are particular animals. They have their own organic motion or rhythm to them. But again, we did lose, and it's sad, and plan to win the next one. The confidence of the House is something that a minority government has always had to win. That agreement that we had with the NDP was one that was precarious on a good day. NDP is very hard to trust, particularly when they jettison their principles as soon as they're in jeopardy. So it's one that we constantly need to gain. There's some red lines that we have with the Bloc that we'll never cross, but if they're willing to work for Canadians and the Quebecers that they represent, why wouldn't we work with them? Why wouldn't we continue to work with the NDP? We share a number of principles. It's just we don't compromise them as easily as the NDP does. But again, it's a minority government. The House will decide, and we'll see what comes next.
Minister Marc Miller, always appreciate your time, and if you do want to release those documents, your office knows how to reach
do it.
All right.
To do it, Dave.
All right, thank you very much, Minister. Talk to you soon.